6 months earlier, I had signed the papers on what I thought was the perfect piece of rural property. 5 acres of beautiful countryside with a charming farmhouse and unique railroad access that ran along the eastern edge. The real estate listing had advertised the railroad feature as a rustic charm, a relic from when the area had been farmland. The property was exactly what I was looking for: quiet, spacious, and far from the restrictive regulations of suburban living. The first few weeks were everything I had imagined. I spent weekends clearing brush and planning the workshop I would build on the eastern portion of my land. My dream was to finally have space for my woodworking hobby. The railroad track seemed like an interesting historical feature, though it appeared abandoned. There were no trains running on it, just old tracks cutting through the countryside. 30 days after moving in, everything changed. A thick envelope arrived by certified mail. I had to sign for it, confused about what official business would require my signature. Inside was a 27-page document with the header, Whispering Pines Homeowners Association Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. This made no sense. The property listing had made no mention of an HOA, and my closing documents contained no references to community restrictions. The cover letter welcomed me to the neighborhood and informed me that I was required to attend the next HOA meeting to properly introduce myself to the community. The letter also included an invoice for $450 in annual dues, already 2 months late, with a $75 late fee attached. I was stunned. The following weekend, I decided to inspect the railroad edge of my property more thoroughly. What I discovered made my heart sink. An abandoned freight train car had been positioned directly across the access point to the eastern portion of my land. It sat there like a rusted fortress wall, completely blocking the only route to nearly half of my property. The train car looked weathered, but had clearly been deliberately placed there. Recently, drag marks in the dirt showed it had been hauled into position. I immediately called the HOA president, whose name and number were listed on the welcome letter. Her name was Catherine Winterfield, though everyone called her Karen. She answered with an irritated tone, as if my call was interrupting something important. "Yes, the train car. It is on HOA common property as part of the railroad easement," she said dismissively when I explained my concern. "The board voted to place it there for aesthetic and security reasons. The eastern portion of your property is designated conservation land anyway. You are not permitted to build on it." "But that was never disclosed to me," I protested. "I own that land, I paid for it." "You should have read the covenants before purchasing," she replied coldly. "The previous owner understood the restrictions perfectly well." We arranged to meet the next day at my property. Karen arrived driving a luxury SUV that seemed out of place in our rural community. She wore designer clothes and sunglasses pushed up into her perfectly highlighted blonde hair. She barely looked at me as she gestured toward the train car. "The railroad easement gives us control of this area," she explained with a condescending smile. "Your deed is subject to all existing easements. The train stays where it is." She handed me another copy of the HOA documents. "I suggest you familiarize yourself with the rules. We run a tight community here." As she drove away, the reality of my situation became painfully clear. I was trapped, unable to access a significant portion of the land I had purchased. This was not about rules or property values. This was about power and control. And I was about to learn just how far this neighborhood tyranny would go to maintain its iron grip. The county records building was located downtown, a beige government structure that looked like it had not been updated since the 1970s. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and furniture polish. I had taken a day off work to investigate the HOA's claims about my property. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, and I needed answers. The records clerk looked bored as I explained my situation. Property records and HOA filings are public information, she said, pointing me toward a computer terminal. You can search by address or subdivision name. Copies are 50 cents per page. I spent hours combing through digital archives of property transfers, easements, and subdivision maps. My eyes grew tired from staring at the screen, but slowly, patterns began to emerge. The original subdivision had been created in 1982, but the HOA was not established until 1995. More interesting was that the railroad easement predated both, granted to the railroad company in 1923. When I requested the original HOA incorporation documents, the clerk had to retrieve them from physical storage. She returned with a dusty folder containing yellowed papers. As I carefully reviewed them, something caught my attention. The original HOA territory map clearly showed my property outside the boundaries of the association. A later amendment, filed in 2008, appeared to expand the territory to include my land and several other peripheral properties. I continued digging, searching for the proper documentation for this amendment. According to state law, such an expansion would require consent from the affected property owners. I could find no record of my property's previous owner providing such consent. The elderly clerk who had been watching me with growing interest approached my table. "Finding what you need?" she asked quietly. When I explained what I was looking for, she frowned slightly. Let me check something." She disappeared into a back room and returned with another file. "This might interest you," she whispered, sliding it toward me. "Not many people know to look for the original plat maps." The file contained the original subdivision survey from 1980, predating the HOA by 15 years. It clearly showed my property as a separate parcel, not part of the planned development at all. More importantly, it showed the railroad easement as a much narrower corridor than what the HOA was now claiming. "The lady who runs that HOA comes in here sometimes," the clerk said quietly, "always filing amendments and changes, never with much supporting documentation." Over the next week, I continued my research, discovering more and more irregularities. Signatures that did not match across documents, amendments filed without the legally required notifications, board meeting minutes that referenced decisions never properly documented. The most disturbing discovery came when I found records of property liens filed against multiple homes over the years. Each followed a similar pattern. A homeowner would challenge the HOA, suddenly face numerous violation notices, then either pay massive fines or sell their property at a loss within months. I tracked down the previous owner of my property, a retired couple now living in Arizona. Our phone conversation was revealing. "We never agreed to join any HOA," the husband told me firmly. "They started sending us notices about 3 years ago, claiming we were subject to their rules. We ignored them at first, but then they blocked our access with that train car, said it was for community security." "What happened then?" I asked. "They made our lives miserable. Fines, harassment, nasty letters. They even sent people to take pictures of our property daily, claiming violations. We finally gave up and sold. We lost money on the deal, but it was worth it to escape." He paused before adding, "That Karen woman, she had someone interested in buying our place below market value. Convenient, right?" The pattern was clear. The HOA had been systematically targeting properties they wanted to control, using intimidation and deception to force owners to sell. The train blocking my land was not a coincidence. It was a deliberate tactic they had used before. Armed with copies of all the relevant documents, I created a comprehensive timeline of the HOA's activities. The paper trail revealed a disturbing truth. This organization had operated through deceit and intimidation for years, expanding their territory without legal authority and bullying anyone who stood in their way. As I organized my findings, one thing became crystal clear. They had finally chosen the wrong person to bully. I was not going to sell my property at a loss or quietly submit to their illegal authority. The HOA might have perfected their intimidation tactics over the years, but they had never faced someone willing to fight back with their own paper trail of evidence. The morning after I requested copies of all HOA financial records, the retaliation began. I opened my mailbox to find 3 separate violation notices, each in an official-looking envelope with the HOA logo prominently displayed. The first cited improper fence height for a fence that did not exist on my property. The second claimed unauthorized landscaping on the eastern portion of my land I could not even access because of their train. The third was for improper garbage container storage, because my trash bin had supposedly been visible from the street for more than 24 hours. Each violation carried a $150 fine, due within 10 days, with an additional $25 per day late fee. I photographed my property, documenting the absence of any fence and my properly stored garbage bins, then drafted a formal response contesting all 3 violations. 2 days later, 5 more violation notices arrived. The accusations grew increasingly absurd. Unapproved exterior paint color. I had not painted anything. Prohibited recreational vehicle storage. I owned no such vehicles. And excessive noise disturbance on a day I had not even been home. I called several neighbors I had met briefly since moving in. Most were friendly but guarded. One woman, Laura, agreed to meet me for coffee but suggested we meet in the next town over. "They watch everything," she explained nervously as we sat in a corner booth. "Karen has board members drive through the neighborhood 3 times daily looking for violations. They target anyone who questions them." "Have they done this to others?" I asked. Laura nodded. "There was a family last year who challenged a special assessment for repaving the cul-de-sac they did not even live on. Within weeks, they had so many violation notices they could not keep up with the fines. The husband lost his temper at a meeting, and Karen used that as proof they were disruptive to community harmony. They sold at a loss 3 months later." When I returned home that afternoon, I noticed neighbors crossing the street to avoid walking past my house. When I waved, they quickly looked away. The next day, I overheard 2 women at the local grocery store. "I heard he is trying to turn that beautiful property into some kind of industrial site," one whispered to the other. "Karen said he wants to bring in more train cars and create a junkyard. Can you imagine what that would do to our property values?" I received a certified letter informing me that due to multiple violations, I was required to attend a compliance hearing with the HOA board. The hearing was scheduled for 2:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, conveniently during working hours when most people would have difficulty attending. I took another day off work and arrived at the community center 15 minutes early. The setup resembled a courtroom, with 5 board members seated at an elevated table and a single chair positioned before them for the defendant. About a dozen other homeowners sat in the audience section, watching with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Karen called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. "We are here to address multiple violations at the property of our newest community member," she announced, not even using my name. The board has documented 17 separate covenant violations in the past 2 weeks. I was permitted 5 minutes to present my case. When I attempted to question the HOA's legal authority over my property based on the documentation I had discovered, Corinne cut me off. This hearing is about specific covenant violations, not philosophical objections to community governance, she said sharply. Please limit your comments to the violations at hand. The vote was unanimous and immediate. All violations were upheld, and I was assessed a total of $4,250 in fines, due within 30 days. Failure to pay would result in a lien being placed on my property. The following morning, Corinne herself appeared at my door. Her luxury SUV idled in my driveway as if she could not bear to turn off the engine and stay a moment longer than necessary. She wore designer sunglasses pushed up into her hair and carried a large manila envelope. The board wanted me to personally deliver this, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. We understand you may be having difficulty adjusting to community living. This is a formal cease and desist letter regarding your investigation into HOA matters. Our attorney has made it very clear that your actions constitute harassment of board members and interference with legitimate HOA business. She held the envelope out like it contained something distasteful. You have two options: pay the fines, drop this ridiculous investigation, and comply with all covenants going forward, or face legal action that will cost you far more than your property is worth. As she turned to leave, she added, "Oh, and I should mention, the board has also approved special signage for properties under compliance review, for community awareness." That afternoon, a maintenance crew arrived and installed bright orange signs along my property line reading "Non-compliant property" in bold black letters. The public shamming was meant to isolate me further from neighbors and break my resolve. Instead, as I watched the crew hammer the last sign into place, I felt a cold determination settle over me. They had escalated this conflict to a new level, but they had no idea what I was about to do next. The war had truly begun, and I was gathering ammunition they never expected. The coffee shop 2 towns over became our first meeting place. I had placed a carefully worded ad in the local newspaper. Experiencing HOA concerns in Whispering Pines. Let us discuss mutual community interests. I included my phone number but not my name. 3 people contacted me, all speaking in guarded tones and insisting on meeting away from the neighborhood. They arrived separately, looking over their shoulders as they entered. Mark, a middle-aged man who had lived in Whispering Pines for 7 years. Elaine, an elderly widow who had been there since before the HOA formed. And David, who had moved in just a year before me. They sat down nervously, nobody wanting to speak first. "Thank you for coming," I said, breaking the ice. "I think we all know why we are here." Elaine spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Those orange signs. They put them on my property last year because my roses were the wrong color. Roses my late husband planted 20 years ago, before any HOA existed." Mark nodded. "They demanded I remove my basketball hoop because it was 6 inches taller than regulation. When I pointed out that the board treasurer had the exact same model, they fined me for disrespectful communication with board members." David's story was similar: arbitrary enforcement, retaliatory fines, and constant surveillance. We spoke for 2 hours, comparing experiences and realizing the pattern was consistent and deliberate. "We need more evidence," I explained, sharing what I had learned at the county record's office. "And we need more homeowners willing to stand with us." Over the following weeks, our group grew. We began meeting in basements and garages, rotating locations to avoid drawing attention. Each new member brought their own HOA horror story and, more importantly, documents, violation notices that contradicted each other, financial statements showing inconsistencies, copies of certified letters and legal threats. One evening, a man named Robert joined our meeting. He appeared more nervous than the others, constantly checking his phone. "I served on the board 3 years ago," he revealed. "As treasurer, I was forced out after questioning certain expenditures." The room fell silent as he pulled a flash drive from his pocket. I kept copies of everything: board meeting minutes that were never officially published, financial records showing HOA funds being used for personal expenses. Karen had the entire board sign non-disclosure agreements, but I never signed mine. The documents were damning. HOA funds had paid for Karen's kitchen renovation, labeled as community center improvements. 3 board members had received consulting fees for unspecified services. Most disturbing were the emails discussing strategies for targeting certain properties they wanted to acquire. "They maintain a list," Robert explained. "Properties they want to control, usually for location or size. Your place was on that list for years because of the railroad access." Our most valuable ally came unexpectedly. Mr. Jameson had lived in the neighborhood for decades, a retired attorney who specialized in real estate law. He rarely attended HOA meetings and kept to himself, which was why Karen's group had never bothered him. He contacted me after seeing the orange signs on my property. "I have watched this happen too many times," he said when we met privately in his home office. "Kept my head down, told myself it was not my problem. But when I saw those signs go up on your property, something snapped." Mr. Jameson reviewed the documents I had gathered, his piercing eyes lighting up as he examined the incorporation papers and amendments. "They made critical mistakes," he said, tapping the papers with a gnarled finger. "Fatal ones." He explained that under state law, certain amendments to HOA territories required unanimous consent from affected property owners. They expanded their territory without proper consent, then retroactively claimed authority. That is fundamentally illegal. I hired a professional surveyor to definitively establish the boundaries of my property and the railroad easement. His report confirmed what I suspected. The train car sat squarely on my deeded property without any legal easement allowing it to be there. "The railroad easement is only 15 feet wide from the center of the tracks," he explained, showing me the detailed survey maps. "That train car extends 30 feet beyond the easement, well onto your property. They have no legal right to place it there." My dining room transformed into command central walls covered with timelines, photos, and documented violations. I created detailed files for each affected homeowner, cataloging every unjustified fine, every threatening letter, every instance of selective enforcement. The most damning evidence came from a source we never expected. Elaine's grandson worked for the company that maintained the HOA's website and email server. "They never changed the admin password," he told us one evening. "Everything is still set to the default. I can access their entire email history." The emails were shocking in their candor. Board members openly discussed targeting problem homeowners and strategizing ways to force them out. Several emails specifically mentioned my property, with Karen writing, "The train car placement worked before. Let us see if history repeats itself." But the smoking gun came in an email Karen had sent just after I closed on my property. "The new owner has no idea the property is not actually part of our HOA. Let us get the welcome packet, and first violation notices ready before he figures it out. They had knowingly claimed authority they did not legally possess. They had deliberately blocked access to my land. And now, we had the evidence to prove it, evidence they never imagined would see the light of day. As our group reviewed all the materials one final time, Mr. Jameson smiled for the first time since I had met him. "You know," he said quietly, "there is a specific legal term for what they have been doing." He looked around the room at the faces of homeowners who had been bullied and intimidated for years. "It is called fraud, and it is time they answered for it." The law office of Patricia Morgan was located in a modest building downtown, not the gleaming high-rise I expected. Mr. Jameson had recommended her specifically. "If you want someone who knows how to take down predatory HOAs, Patricia is your attorney," he had said. "She has made quite a reputation for herself in that niche." I arrived for our consultation with 2 heavy boxes of documents, every piece of evidence our group had gathered over the past months. Patricia was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, with reading glasses perched on top of her head and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Let me see what you have gathered," she said, clearing space on her conference table. I spread out the documents chronologically. The original subdivision plat, the HOA incorporation papers, the illegal amendments, the evidence of financial misappropriation, and the emails proving they knew my property was never legally part of their association. As she reviewed the materials, her expression changed from professional interest to something approaching excitement. "This is textbook overreach," she said, tapping the incorporation documents. "But what they did with that train gives us the leverage we need. Blocking access to your property is not just a covenant issue, it is a clear case of physical encroachment." She pulled out a legal pad and began sketching a strategy. HOAs operate under very specific state laws. When they overstep, most homeowners lack the resources or knowledge to challenge them effectively. But you have assembled quite a case here. Patricia explained how a single missing signature on the original incorporation documents created a legal house of cards. State law requires unanimous consent for certain amendments, especially those that expand HOA territory to include previously exempt properties. Without documentation showing your property was properly incorporated, their entire legal foundation regarding your land is built on quicksand. "What do we do first?" I asked. "We send a formal letter outlining our findings and demanding they remove the train car immediately, rescind all fines, and acknowledge your property is not subject to their authority," she replied. "But that is just to establish the legal record of notification. The real action will happen at the county level." Patricia explained a little-known clause in state law regarding HOA formation and consent requirements. "There is a specific filing we can make with the county recorder's office that essentially challenges the legal validity of the HOA's authority over your property. Once filed, it triggers a review process that could invalidate not just their control over your land, but potentially their entire operating structure." "The entire HOA?" I asked, surprised. She nodded. "If we can prove they knowingly operated without proper legal authority, expanded illegally, and engaged in fraud, which your evidence strongly suggests, the county has the power to dissolve the association entirely." I left her office with a clear plan and a renewed sense of purpose. The following day, we sent the formal letter to the HOA board via certified mail, requiring signature confirmation. Their response was swift and vicious. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived containing a cease and desist letter from their attorney, threatening legal action for defamation, interference with contractual relations, and violation of HOA governing documents. The letter demanded I pay all outstanding fines immediately, plus an additional $15,000 for legal costs incurred in addressing baseless claims. Karen called an emergency board meeting and raised the monthly dues for all homeowners, citing unexpected legal expenses. The clear message to the community: this is what happens when someone challenges authority. The confrontation escalated when their attorney, a slick man in an expensive suit named Richard Bannerman, cornered me in the parking lot of my workplace. He approached as I was walking to my car, speaking loudly enough for my colleagues to overhear. "You are making a very costly mistake," he said, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "My clients have deep pockets and the full weight of legal precedent on their side. You will lose your house before this is over." What he did not realize was that I was recording every word on my phone, which was in my pocket with the voice memo app running. His attempted intimidation was another piece of evidence showing the HOA's pattern of behavior. That evening, our group met one final time before executing the legal maneuver Patricia had devised. 27 homeowners had joined our cause, each contributing evidence of HOA misconduct and financial mismanagement. We had assembled a comprehensive case showing years of fraudulent activity, selective enforcement, and illegal expansion of authority. "Tomorrow morning, we file the documents with the county recorder," I explained to the group. "Patricia will meet us there to ensure everything is properly processed." The tension in the room was palpable. Many of these people had suffered under the HOA's tyranny for years, afraid to speak out or challenge authority. Now they were taking a stand together, though several still feared retaliation. "What if this does not work?" Elaine asked quietly. "What if they come after all of us?" Mr. Jameson answered before I could. "Then we fight them in court with the evidence we have gathered. But having reviewed everything, I believe the county will act in our favor. The documentation is simply too compelling to ignore." The following morning, Patricia and I arrived at the county recorder's office as soon as it opened. We brought the carefully prepared legal filings challenging the HOA's authority based on improper formation, illegal expansion, and fraudulent representation. The clerk stamped the documents with a heavy thud that echoed through the office. That sound represented the beginning of the end for an organization that had terrorized homeowners for decades. The county would now be required to investigate our claims and make a determination about the HOA's legal status. As we left the office, Patricia handed me a copy of the filed documents. "Those are the dominoes," she said with a smile. "Now we wait for them to fall." I looked down at the papers in my hand. One signature, mine, on a legal challenge that could bring down an entire corrupt organization. The wheels of justice had been set in motion, and there was nothing Karen or her board could do to stop what was coming. The emergency meeting notice appeared on every door in Whispering Pines just 3 days after our filing with the county. "Urgent community meeting attendance mandatory, important HOA legal matters to be DISCUSSED." The meeting was scheduled for 7:00 p.m. at the community center, a time when most residents could attend. This was the reaction we had anticipated. The county had notified the HOA of our legal challenge as required by law, and now Karen and her board were scrambling to control the narrative before homeowners learned the truth from county officials. Our group made careful preparations. I created detailed information packets for every household in the neighborhood, containing copies of the key documents proving the HOA's fraudulent activities. We arranged for 2 people to discreetly record the entire meeting, one with a visible camera as a distraction, and another with hidden recording devices to capture everything that happened. The community center buzzed with tension as homeowners filed in for the meeting. Every seat was filled, with people standing along the walls. Board members sat at a long table on a raised platform at the front of the room, their expressions a mixture of anger and poorly concealed fear. Karen stood at the center, clutching a stack of papers and whispering urgently to Richard Bannerman, their attorney. At precisely 7:00 p.m., Karen called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. "Thank you all for coming to this important meeting," she began, her voice tight with controlled anger. "It has come to the board's attention that certain individuals in our community have been spreading misinformation and making false claims about the legitimacy of our HOA." She continued with a practiced speech about community values, property protections, and the importance of unified governance. One disgruntled homeowner, unwilling to abide by the same rules we all live under, has filed frivolous legal paperwork that could potentially cost each of you thousands in legal fees to defend our community. Richard Bannerman stepped forward, his expensive suit and confident demeanor carefully calculated to intimidate. "As legal counsel for the association, I want to assure everyone that these claims are without merit. However, defending against them will require resources. The board will be implementing a special assessment to cover legal costs." A murmur of concern spread through the crowd at the mention of additional fees. Karen quickly tried to move to a vote on the special assessment without allowing discussion. That was when I stood up, holding a cardboard box filled with our information packets. "Before we vote on anything," I said loudly, "every homeowner here deserves to know exactly what this is about and what evidence the county is reviewing." Karen banged her gavel. "You are out of order. This is not an open discussion forum." "Actually," interrupted Mr. Jameson, also standing now, "according to the HOA bylaws, Article 7, Section 3, any member may request the floor before a financial vote. Since you are asking us to fund legal action, we have the right to understand what we are defending." Several homeowners voiced their agreement. Karen reluctantly acknowledged Mr. Jameson, though her knuckles were white around the gavel. "Every person here deserves to know the truth," I announced, moving to distribute our packets. "Inside these folders is documented proof of years of fraud perpetrated by this board." As people began opening the folders, the room filled with the sound of shuffling papers and shocked exclamations. They reviewed bank statements showing HOA funds spent on luxury personal items, falsified violation records, and the systematic targeting of anyone who questioned authority. Page 3 shows HOA funds paying for Karen's kitchen renovation, listed as community center improvements, I explained. Page 4 contains emails discussing how to use the train car to block my access and force me to sell my property below market value, the same tactic used against previous owners. The audience's shock turned to outrage as they digested the information. One by one, homeowners stood to share their own stories of selective enforcement and harassment. Karen attempted to regain control of the meeting, but the carefully constructed facade was crumbling in real time. Board members began distancing themselves, with the treasurer suddenly claiming he had raised concerns about these expenditures previously. Richard Bannerman desperately tried to confiscate the packets, claiming they contained privileged communications. But it was too late. The evidence was in everyone's hands. As the meeting descended into chaos, Karen's composure shattered completely. Her voice rose to a shriek as she defended her actions. "You all needed someone to maintain standards. Without me, this neighborhood would be worthless." In her rage, she inadvertently confirmed everything I had claimed. That train car was the only way to control that property. The previous owners were just as difficult until we blocked their access. They sold, and so will you. Her voice echoed in the suddenly silent room as she realized what she had admitted. The hidden cameras captured every damning word, every confession that would later become evidence in multiple investigations. A board member tried to call for adjournment, but homeowners refused to leave, demanding answers about the misappropriated funds and falsified documents. The meeting devolved into multiple heated conversations as neighbors compared violation notices and realized the pattern of selective enforcement. Richard Bannerman pulled Corinne aside, whispering urgently in her ear as the gravity of the situation became clear. The organization they had used to control the neighborhood and enrich themselves was collapsing before their eyes. As I watched the scene unfold, I caught the eye of the elderly clerk from the county records office, who had come to witness the confrontation. She gave me a slight nod of approval before turning to leave. Her simple act of showing me the original plat maps had set this entire chain of events in motion. The community center emptied slowly that night, homeowners leaving in small groups, talking intently about what they had learned. The HOA board left hurriedly through a side door, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Corinne was the last to leave, her face ashen as she gathered her papers with trembling hands. The truth had finally been exposed to the light of day, and nothing would ever be the same in Whispering Pines again. The official letter from the county arrived exactly 30 days after our filing, delivered by certified mail. I signed for it with steady hands, though my heart was racing. The envelope contained a multi-page determination with formal legal language, but the conclusion was beautifully clear. The Whispering Pines Homeowners Association had been operating without proper legal authority for years and was officially dissolved, effective immediately. The county investigation had confirmed all our key allegations. The HOA had illegally claimed authority over properties never properly incorporated. They had filed amendments without required consent. They had misappropriated funds and engaged in systematic fraud. The determination was unequivocal. The HOA no longer existed as a legal entity. I made copies of the determination and delivered them to every household in the neighborhood. For many homeowners, it was the first day in decades they had lived without HOA control over their daily lives. The train car that had symbolized my imprisonment was removed the following week. The towing company arrived early in the morning with heavy equipment. The screeching of metal on metal as it was towed away became the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The tracks remained as a historical feature, but the barrier was gone, and I could finally access the entirety of my property. Corinne and the board members did not go quietly. They attempted to appeal the county determination, but the evidence against them was overwhelming. 3 board members accepted plea deals in exchange for testimony against Corinne, who faced the most serious charges. The criminal investigation uncovered even more widespread financial impropriety than we had initially discovered. HOA dues had funded personal vacations, home renovations, and even college tuition for board members' children, all disguised as community expenses. Corinne was eventually charged with multiple counts of fraud, misappropriation of funds, and filing false documents with government agencies. Most board members settled civil claims from homeowners by paying restitution for unjust fines and fees. Corinne alone refused to settle, maintaining her innocence even as evidence mounted. After a 3-day trial that made local headlines, she was found liable for substantial damages. She sold her house shortly afterward and moved away from the community she had terrorized for so long. The neighborhood transformed without the shadow of arbitrary enforcement. Homeowners began talking to each other without fear. Gardens flourished with plants previously forbidden by restrictive covenants. Basketball hoops appeared in driveways. Fences were built or removed according to actual needs rather than arbitrary rules.